So a lot of times we get people that will complain about sciatica and basically symptoms, nerve-like symptoms that might present around the hip or into the lower legs. And quite often, if you can kind of work through some of these stretches, these strength and mobility-based exercises, kind of get the nerves gliding, that helps relieve a lot of those symptoms. So whether or not you truly have sciatica versus a piriformis syndrome versus some sort of like radiculopathy associated with a nerve root impingement, these are kind of the basic exercises you can walk through to try to alleviate those symptoms. So that being said, today we don't really need too much equipment. We just have our mats. We have a Swiss ball for some stabilization drills, which actually I forgot to grab you one. And then we also have a couple of TheraBands, just in case you want to progress the exercises, work a little bit harder. We also have a chair, because one of our exercises we're going to use the chair to kind of facilitate. But with that being said, again, let's go ahead and get started. We always have a few just general mobility things to work out. So we're going to start with some standing hip openers. So standing in place, knee up, rotate out to the side. You can do these kind of walking forward, or you can do standing in place, whatever you prefer. I feel like I always say this, but I'm like, I need this today.
I think we need everything.
One more. And then we're going to go to some either knee to chest stretches, so you can just plug your knee up towards your chest. Actually, we'll do both. We'll start with these guys. Switch. So if balance is an issue, of course, you can do these lying down, go next to a wall to have something to help support yourself. But really try to hug that knee up towards your chest, help stretch out the glutes, proximal side of your hamstring. And then we're going to go to some straight leg. So from here, you even have mobility to do that. And don't feel like you have to get your toes all the way up to touch your fingers. If you're here, that's totally cool too.
Touch your knee.
Touch your knee, yeah. I mean, with this, I know. With this one, you basically just don't want to overcompensate. Like, put it in half and just keep it fairly gentle, but again, getting a nice good stretch. This is all that dynamic warm up. Good. And then we're going to go to standing hamstring stretch, but we're going to play around with this one. So again, foot out, hinge at your hips, lean over. I'm going to keep my toes pointed up on this one for about 10 seconds. And then I'm going to point my toes. Good. And then pull your toes up again. Basically, as we do this, we're not only changing the position of one of your calf muscles that attaches above your knee, your point, but we're also getting a little bit of that neural mobility involved as it wraps around the ankle. You have a nerve that kind of traverses past that point into the bottom of your foot, so we're starting to get that distal mobility going. And then switch, so left leg out, hinge at your hips, and neutral spine. I'm not trying to get my forehead to touch my knee. I'm just trying to get a nice stretch in my hamstrings. And my foot, my toes are pulled up with the dorsiflexion. And then we're going to point our toes into plantar flexion. You might notice you feel this in different spots when you do that. Of course, I still feel my hamstrings, but as I pull my toes up, I really feel that into my calf, almost my heel. as I point my toes, I actually feel it kind of on the outside of my leg a little bit more. And you might be different, because you have a few different nerve branches that run down through there, but just pay attention. Pay attention to where you feel more tight or restricted, and just don't force it. And come on up. Last one, we're going to move into kind of a staggered stance here. I'm going to reach forward, place my hand on the ground. So left hand, left foot forward. I'm going to open up. You gotta get another good hamstring stretch, good spinal opener. If you have the mobility, you can always now put your opposite hand on the ground. So my right hand next to my left foot and rotate the other way, but as you can see, it's so loud. As you can see, I'm pretty tight. And then walk your hands back up your leg. We're going to switch. So right foot out, left foot back. I'm going to reach forward with my right hand. Place it next to my right foot. Lift it up. You notice I'm turning my head to look up towards my fingers. I'll challenge your balance a little bit more. And I'm going to try putting my left hand on the ground so it's even worse, and rotate with my right. If you have a yoga block or something, you can always put that on the ground as well. Good. And then walk back up toward hands. It's like it throws me off. Really quiet. All right, so let's go ahead and move on into some of the hip stabilization stuff, and then I guess more in-depth hip mobility stuff. So one of my favorite stretches to do for that neural mobility involving the hamstrings is working on basically a closed kinetic chain hamstring stretch. So instead of going from I guess hinging on your hips down, we're going from like a bottom-up approach with this. So what we're going to do is bend our knees, hold out our hips, hands go under our toes, so we're anchoring here. And then we're just going to raise our hips up until you feel that tension develop in the back of your hamstrings. Calf. We're going to hold that for about 10 seconds. Make sure you try to breathe into the stretch, relax. Then I'm going to bend my knees again. Then I'm going to raise up again. So we're going to do that one more time after we hold this. The idea with this one is we're just changing up the way in which we're stretching our hamstrings, getting a little bit of that nerve to glide. Bend your knees. And come on, one more time. Theoretically, by the third time through this, you should feel like you get a little bit further into your stretch. My knees are able to go a little bit straighter before I feel that same tension develop back there. Check it out if you need to. We're going to go ahead and grab our chairs. Chair. get this set up. Reese is going to explain the next one for you.
So we're gonna go over some sciatic nerve glides. So we do a lot of nerve gliding when patients have neural tension anywhere in their body, and it's called flossing the nerves. So the way we can mobilize soft tissue, joints, we want to mobilize that nerve, get it moving well in your body with movement, right? So we don't want there to be pain when you move a certain way. We want it to be able to be mobile and move smoothly with all motion, exercise, whatever you're doing. So, do you want to take it from here?
Okay, so again, let's just say we want it nice and mobile. You can think of a piece of floss. We're flossing the nerve. Nerves don't stretch, but we want it to move like a little piece of floss underneath the muscles, underneath the different structures. So in this position, what I like to do is tuck your chin. We're going to slump into really bad posture. Kind of round forward, and from here, pull your toes up towards your nose, straighten out your leg, and then you're going to look up, sit up straight, and then you can bend your foot back down to the ground. So there's a few ways you can do this, but this is kind of, I think the easiest way to remember it is every time your foot's up and your toes are up, then you're going to sit up nice and straight. And every time your toes go down, you're going to look back down. Because essentially, as I pull my toes up, I'm pulling that nerve down this way. And so I want to sit up to keep slack here. But if I'm curled forward and I'm pulling it this way, we're basically pulling it in two different directions. So toes up, toes down, head down. You're going to start here, slump into bad posture. My toes go up, my knee straightens, and then I sit up nice and straight. I point my toes, tuck my chin, let my knee fall back down. Alternatively, you can just sit here and do ankle pumps. I have people do that too. But if we're looking for more of that kind of gross neural mobilization, you want to make sure you're getting the whole spine and hip involved as well. We're going to do a couple more on the left side. So again, starting position, feet on the ground, slump into bad posture. I put my hands behind me. I like doing that. Toes go up, knees straighten, and then I straighten. Like my toes, tuck my chin. So this might work better if you have a higher level surface you can sit on, so you can swing your leg back and forth. But I think you get the idea. Again, the easiest way to remember it is every time your toes are up, your head's up. Every time your toes are pointed, your head goes down. All right, move these guys out of the way. Important thing to know on those guys, if you are getting any numbness, tingling, or any burning sensations, that is your nerve getting a little bit irritated. So, of course, back off, stop stretching, because we don't want to piss off an already agitated structure. So, pay attention. If it hurts, if it's irritating, don't do it. Okay, moving on. So, a lot of times, when we do see sciatica, those kind of neural symptoms, it's because of an imbalance in the system. And a lot of times it's because we aren't using our core or our hips correctly. So a lot of these foundational exercises are important to make sure that your hip stabilization comes back. So we're going to go ahead and hop onto the floor and do some prone hip extensions to get our glute max working. And then there's a couple progressions to this one, whether you want to go on hands and knees or ultimately progress to a plank position. Let me just turn sideways too, actually. I'll go on my hands and knees. So the big thing with this one, whether you're lying flat like Marissa or on your hands and knees like me, a lot of times people will start getting their back too involved. So it's basically just a donkey kick, right? But we see people all the time doing these, or just trying to get extra height, even if they aren't over-exaggerating like this rock, they might just try to do this, right? And you can kind of see my low back start to arch. And even as I do that, I feel that way more, if I can even balance and do this, right here than I do in my glute. So what I want you guys to think about is, again, axis of rotation, we say this all the time, right through that hip. There's a metal rod going right through your hip. Don't let it go any higher. We don't want to see that translation upwards. We want a nice rotation around the center of that joint. So So you can lay flat. It's probably, level 1, level 2, hands and knees. I'm going here and pushing my heel right up towards the ceiling. Squeezing that left butt cheek. You should really only feel this in your glute. You might feel a little bit of facilitation from the hamstring. Your core should be tight. But really, I want you to feel that fatigue, that burn in your glute. Or alternatively, you can come on to plank. Same thing. You notice the movement really is not that big. And my back is not moving that much. So, to reiterate, we want our glutes working. The point of that one really is to get our glute max to work as our hip extender. You don't want to have an overactive piriformis and or hip flexors and low back because that sets up that whole discrepancy and imbalance. But moving on to the next one. Again, these are kind of our, I think Shay calls him his rotator cuff series for the hip. So just like you have a rotator cuff in your shoulder, you have a bunch of muscles in your butt that helps to stabilize, keep that joint centered. So these are the best ones you can kind of just break out, whether you're at home, in the gym, to make sure you're using these muscles. You're gonna go ahead and why don't we do clamshells first since we're already here. So Marisa can show you sideline view. I'm gonna come up into half plank. Shift this over so you can see. Okay, so basically with a clamshell, we're getting those deep rotators to work. My hips are staying forward. I'm not super flexed like this. And I'm keeping my bottom hip off the ground in my plank position. Risa's in sideline, so it's always a great place to start. We're gonna keep our heels together and just raise our top knee. But as you raise that top knee, be careful you're not letting your whole body rotate back. Again, you should just feel like your hip is doing the work, pulling that knee up. You can absolutely take your foot off of your other knee too. I'm gonna do like a fire hydrant base pose. That makes it even a little bit more challenging. Because then you're not relying on your bottom foot to stabilize. And we switch sides. Maybe you can show them with the band too. Yeah, flip it this way so you can see bottom line up. So when I'm in plank position, as we talked about, my elbow is under my shoulder and I'm pushing away from the ground. I am slightly flexed, if you can see that line, but I'm not collapsing inwards like this. I'm trying to keep my hips tilted forward slightly. And Marisa is showing you guys the progression with the band. So say you have never worked on these before and you have a pretty weak butt. Start with the sideline on the ground, then you can progress to using a band, and then try to be popping up into a plank and see how you feel with that. Yeah, in plank position, we're really making sure we're getting both glutes to fire. Part of what's keeping you up and supported. Good. Okay. So those target our deeper rotators in the hip, the ones that really, again, help to keep that joint centered and allow for a little bit of external rotation of the hip. We've talked a lot about our glute medius, so this is one that is actually how we test the strength of this muscle, so it's a really great way to truly isolate that glute med. Make sure you're targeting it and getting appropriate activation. So once again, varying levels of progressions. You can just lay on your side. You can go from laying on your side to adding a band to that for resistance, or you can pop up into plank. And as always with plank, you can be on your knee, on your ankle, or elbow to hand. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can play with it. But do you want to do the sideline with the band?
Sideline with the band?
The best direction.
I can't read that.
It's really tiny. But sideline hip abduction. So I'm gonna come up into my plank position again. I'm on my knee and elbow. You can always come up to full plank and plank with a hand even. But I'm gonna tilt my hips forward. You don't wanna be tilted too far back or else you'll feel your hip flexors. Tilted slightly forward, straighten my bottom leg out, and then I'm gonna lead with my heel up and back behind me. You should feel this in your butt. If you feel it on the side of your thigh, in the front of your thigh, try rolling your hips forward a little bit. If you choose to do plank position as well, make sure you're not dropping your bottom hip. It's really easy to forget to stabilize on the bottom as well and keep your hips off of the ground. And then you can also notice neither of us are really arching our back too much. We're not hinging through our core. It really is our hip kind of guiding directing movement. You know, both butt cheeks burning. So I'm going to do the other side just to show like full plank position too. Marisa could absolutely, again, challenge herself if she wanted to go and plank with a band, if she wanted to do just regular sideline. You can really get creative with how you want to do it. So, fun things. You're going to go up into plank. Again, in this position, make sure your core is super tight so you're stabilizing. Legs going up and back.
Plank is hard doing both sides because you're working both,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So it's just so tired for the other side.
And even if you wanted to, whether it's the position Maurice's in or plank, even just doing an isometric hold is challenging. But whichever one you choose, again, make sure you're concentrating on what muscles you're using as you make it more challenging for yourself. It's really easy to forget why you're doing the exercise that you are, so just be intentional about it and make sure that you are using the right muscles. You're feeling it where, you know, you're talked about feeling it, like right in the butt. If you're feeling it in your back, in your thigh, probably not doing it right, and then you're only facilitating a dysfunctional pattern, I guess. So probably only going to make symptoms worse. So pay attention, less is more in this case. So moving on, let's go ahead and do our hamstring exercise. So we are going to bring back the bridges, but we're going to add a hamstring curl to the ball. So, you know, we talk a lot about with, you know, hip stabilization drills, how important the actual hip is, but we still want good co-activation of all the other muscles around it. So this is a great one to make sure that we're engaging pretty much every muscle in the lower body, from the hips all the way down into your thighs and your lower leg, as well as making sure that your core is activated and engaged. So, once again, if you've been following us, you know that we like certain exercises a lot, and we've talked a lot about bridges. This is just a variation on a bridge. So, our feet are up on the ball. We're going to lay back on our backs, keeping our back flat against the ground. We're going to squeeze our glutes and keep our core tight. Raise our hips up towards the ceiling, and then curl in, and then straighten out, and lower it back. So the ball makes it a little bit more challenging, because as you can see, it wobbles side to side. You want to try to eliminate as much of that instability as possible by keeping your glutes and your core engaged. You really don't even have to try to feel your hamstrings on this one. You're going to feel it no matter what you do. But once again, just because this is a pretty hamstring dominant exercise, don't let that, you know, make you forget to engage your glutes and your core. If you keep those other two groups engaged, the exercise becomes a little bit more manageable. You aren't flopping around as much. You're much more stable, and that load is now dispersed from your hamstrings to your glutes, to your core, so it's not as hamstring heavy. So if you're someone that cramps up with your hamstrings quite a bit, this is a good one to start working on, to be a little bit more, I guess, aware of which muscle groups you are engaging, and kind of re-educate your muscles on how to work together. And I'm gonna do one more. So, does not take anything at all to feel your hamstrings on that one. Just the act of that concentric contraction of engaging your hamstrings to bend your knee. You will feel it, and once again, we do still want to use a muscle like our hamstrings. They can be problematic quite a bit of the times, especially when we're looking at neural tension. Sometimes those hammies get too tight, and right where that sciatic nerve crosses down from our hip into the back of our leg, we can see restrictions start to form there. But just because a hamstring muscle is tight doesn't mean that it shouldn't be strong. You should still absolutely work on it. But once again, it's coming back to the idea of creating coactivity amongst the other muscles and dispersing that load so that everything is working together to be a little bit more efficient. All right, so hip is one side, core is the other. Again, we've talked a lot about just that balance between like our hips and our core, making sure those are the two muscles that we're really engaging and using to stabilize our bodies versus the hip flexors and the low back. So we're gonna piece together some of those core exercises that we have probably seen, but we do have a couple more mobility ones associated as well. So we'll start with the mobility just to make sure everything is nice and loose and open. We'll toss our ball to the side. So we are going to lay onto our sides, stack our legs. Hopefully I don't turn this thing off. Hands together, and then we're going to open up. So we did these last week, I believe, for our posture one. It's a really good spinal opener for lumbar spine, lumbopelvic dissociation. Again, you can always, always, always put your hand on your knee, give yourself that little traction. If you're someone that has really tight hips, you can go into a door frame if you'd like to help stabilize you. I think Marisa showed us last week how if your chest or shoulder is really tight, you can put your hand behind your head. And that gives you a little bit more support. Switch sides. Once again, my legs are stacked, hands are together, and then I'm opening up, following with my head. And even if you don't have any neural tension or sciatic-like issues or any low back pain, these are still a really good one to visit. I mean, every day, but from time to time. Just was in a car for like 5 hours yesterday, so sitting in the same seat for 5 hours, this feels pretty good. Okay. Back together. From here, we're just going to roll onto our backs. Feet nice and flat on the ground. And we're going to just do lower trunk rotations. So you can put your hands on the ground, hands behind your head, whatever is comfortable to you. And we're just going to let our knees rock to one side and then back to the other. So once again, a little bit more of a dynamic, fluid mobility exercise. The idea is to create a little bit more of a spinal twist, create that lumbopelvic dissociation. In this position, try to keep your core a little bit more engaged. We're letting our knees essentially fall against gravity, so you don't want to just let them fall and hit the ground. Like bounce, and then your muscles can go into spasm. Which that sounds pretty dramatic, but like, if, again, you are someone that experiences chronic low back pain and your muscles, your low back are overly sensitized to different stimulus, if you just let your knees fall and kind of like rebound like that, your muscles might try to grab and guard you from that continued stretch, and that's how we often get ourselves into difficult situations is taking it a little too far and not engaging the right muscles. So you can keep going as sort of a fluid mobility drill here, or you can also take your foot, put it on your opposite knee, and help pull it down to the ground to create more of a stretch versus a mobilization. Switch. Center. Okay, so moving on to some of our stability drills. Once again, some of these we've talked about from the start, but we are going to move on to bird dogs. So kind of looks like the position we were in for our hip extension. So you can absolutely move from hands and knees to a plank position, or even to bear pose, which is essentially on your hands and knees, but just knees off the ground. So tucking my toes up and coming up like that. The bird dog, again, if you've been with us, it's basically lifting your alternating sides, so lifting your opposite hand and foot from the ground and making sure core stays stable so you have a nice neutral spine. Yep, that looks pretty darn good. She's forming a nice straight line. She's not letting her hips shift too much from side to side, keeping everything nice and engaged. So I'm going to come up into bear pose. Again, I'm pushing the ground away from me, my core is engaged, and I'm lifting opposite arm, leg. If any one of these feels too difficult, you can always start with just working on that hip extension. Start working on reaching one hand up. If you want to work on progressing to a point where you can be in a plank, you know, I'm doing bird dogs, and just start with holding a plank and lifting one arm at a time, lifting one foot at a time. But the primary importance of this one, again, is making sure that your hips are not waddling side to side. As I go to shift, whether it's switching from opposite hand knee to the other one, or even just from one hand to one hand, or one foot to one foot, we really don't want to see a bunch of this, kind of letting my hips rotate. You know, once again, people really try to get in that mindset of, I'm doing my workout, I'm at the gym, let's go ahead and get like my 3 sets of 10 in, and then you start forgetting to keep your emotions very slow and controlled. But less is more, so I would so much rather you guys do 2, 3, 4 of these guys, but do them nice and correctly, and then take a break instead of trying to bust out 10 like this. Like, you're not really going to get a lot out of this, except maybe get your heart rate up a little bit, which is great, but it's not the point of that exercise. It's to make sure you guys are moving correctly, stabilizing correctly, so that you can go do other things that get your heart rate up, like running or biking, without having symptoms. Okay, let's move on to our other favorite, dead bugs. So we are going to flip onto our backs. Once again, back staying neutral, so back's flat on the ground. You can absolutely do one foot at a time, one arm at a time, opposite arm and leg. Does not matter. Know your level though. Obviously, doing an arm is probably easier than doing your feet versus doing both at the same time. But dead bug, again, we're on our backs, nice and flat against the ground. Our feet are up, hands are up. Switch so that, again, one foot and one hand are going in opposite direction. And then we come back up and switch. So the nice thing about these guys is it really forces you to engage the core so that that pelvis doesn't tilt forward and our back stays nice and flat on the ground. Think about keeping your rib cage stacked over your pelvis, but we're also doing a cross-kinetic pattern, so we're getting our obliques involved. You can always grab something like a weight to hold up overhead and just do a foot as well. Other variations again would be a slight bend in your knee if you feel like your back starts to arch if your leg is straight. Or if you really want to challenge yourself, you could go just put your hands behind your head and start working on those lower leg raises. And you can keep your knees bent, same thing. Or even just one at a time here. So many fun variations you can do with that one. But ultimately the idea with this is to get the core to stabilize, get that transversus abdominis activated. So if you're only really focusing on one thing, it's making sure that that back is staying flat on the ground and you're not letting it start to tilt as you're dropping the leg down. All right, on to the next one. So I'm going to grab my band for this. I'm going to leave it up to you if you want to or not, but we're basically working on co-activation of our hip flexors now. So these are supine marches, but I'm going to put the band around my feet to give myself a little bit of resistance. The difference between this one and the dead bugs, again, is I'm pulling up against resistance. I'm creating flexion in my hip. And the natural tendency whenever we are working on hip flexion exercises or doing something that involves hip flexion, whether that's running, biking, going upstairs, is to let that hip flexor group take over and then put us into that like arch position of our low back. And then all of our spinal extensors kick in as well. And then you get that ensuing dysfunction. So we're trying to create a nice balance system where we still use our hip flexors as they are a primary mover, but we're dispersing that load like we talked about with the hamstrings and making sure that our core is facilitating movement. So we're going to lay on our backs, back nice and flat against the ground. Again, you can put your hands out to the side, behind your head, whatever you want. But with my back flat here, I'm going to keep my core nice and tense, nice and engaged, or else that's when my back starts to arch. And I'm going to pull my toes up towards my hip. It's like I'm doing a little march. So if you try this one without keeping your core engaged, you're going to feel a lot of tension pretty much right at the front of your hip, like right where that hinging occurs. And it feels pretty compressive because my hip flexors are so active, it creates a shift in that joint that more or less pulls the head of the femur forward. But if I can keep my back flat against the ground, use my core to help stabilize, keeping it tense in there, all of a sudden that compression goes away. I still feel a lot of activation in my hips in that hip flexor group. They're very tight, like when I palpate them, I can feel that muscle working, but I don't feel like that joint is getting all jammed up in there. And then if you want to challenge yourself even more, you can absolutely pop up to feet off the ground. You see my head shaking? And same thing. But like we keep talking about, as you go to challenge yourself, don't forget what the whole point of the exercise is. Here it would be pretty easy for me to just forget about keeping my core engaged and just start marching, doing like a bicycle. But that's not the point. The point is, again, to disperse that load between the hip flexor group as well as the transversus abdominis, so that way that joint doesn't get jammed up in there and create that imbalance that we often see at the lower quadrant as far as the hips and the core. So moving on to some of our final stretches, we're going to just walk through once again some of our favorite stretches to address the restrictions we often see with the lower extremity. While all these exercises, again, they might be repeats, it's a nice program to walk through if you do have anything associated with sciatic-like symptoms, nerve impingement, because it does touch a little bit more on the fundamentals of keeping the hips and the core stabilized and making sure you're really honing in on some of those stretches like the nerve glides to facilitate, basically decrease inflammation around that structure. That covers it, right? Okay, so let's go ahead. Our favorite, as always, is our half kneeling hip flexor stretch. That one, and we should all do it every day, all day. But half kneeling, tuck your hips underneath you, shift your weight forward, reach up overhead. In this position too, sometimes what I like to try to play around with is some of that neural mobility. Feet back. So if I take my hand down, and again, I'm just holding that pelvic tuck, I can absolutely do that little chin tuck and slouch into bad posture. The second I start to slouch, kind of rounding out my lower cervical thoracic spine, I really feel that tension develop in the front of my leg. It's again, one of the nerves runs down the front. It's not your sciatic nerve, it's a different group, but similar lumbar segments it's coming from. It's up a little bit higher. But if I tuck my chin, I'm gonna hold there and then just come right back up. Again, it'll feel like a different tension than a stretch. So you don't wanna push it too far. And we're gonna switch sides. Tucking my hips, shifting my weight forward. Sometimes when I add in these nerve glides, I'll feel a little bit more of a release than when I don't, when I'm just stretching the muscle. So it's something worth trying. Just be careful with it. These are always some of the easiest ones to get to and the best ones to get to when you're limited on time. But upside the knee, pulling my knee up across my body towards my shoulder. And to add some of that nerve gliding, you can always try moving different parts of your leg, your back. So adding like an ankle pump in here. Sides. And adding my little ankle pumps. I'm going to grab us a little yoga strap real quick and show you guys my tibial nerve block. So, we're going to put this around our foot and kind of pull up like we're doing a hamstring stretch. You can absolutely just hang out and do your nerve glides in this position too, just kind of pointing your toes back and forth. That's a really great way, especially if you don't have good hamstring mobility. But if you let that foot just fall across your body, you'll feel a lot of tension develop. If you have no tension, if you have tight hips like me, I feel that all in the back of my hip and down the back of my leg, and I even feel my big toe on this one. So here, once again, you can add ankle pumps if you want to, or you can just hang out. But this is more often than not recognized as an IT band stretch. But I think what people don't realize with this one is you really are putting that nerve on a pretty good stretch, pretty good traction here. So if you are someone like me that you're feeling it in your big toe, maybe don't take it so far. Back to center. Switch legs. Let it fall across. The other thing to recognize with this one too is my hips are more or less staying on the ground. I'm not letting my whole body rotate across like we were with the lower trunk rotation. So focusing on that nerve mobility back through here and getting some Stretch across the hamstrings, glutes. Just because of the attachment to the IT band, you might feel like you have tension developing through there. IT band is the fascial structure, so the IT band itself doesn't particularly stretch, but structures around it do, and the structures it attaches to, like your glutes and your TFL can. So just pay attention. Really feel that with my dorsal flex. And back to center. And then last but not least, we'll end in our child's pose. So creating some of that flexion through our lower spine and our glutes, just to calm everything down, but still have a stretch more proximally. And again, you can walk your fingers to one side if you want, versus the other, and that's going to get more of your lat involved. And while this stretch does really work on stretching your lats, stretching your glutes, and having my knees flexed, my hip flexed, takes tension off of that nerve in the lower extremities, but now we're creating some flexion, slight flexion and mobility from the waist up. So we're taking it now in a different direction. So, if you guys have any issues with sciatica, nerves, symptoms that kind of travel down your legs, these are all excellent ones to get to. I know we've talked a lot about doing like cobra poses as well, so depending upon really what you're feeling, those are important, but this is really focusing on the nerve mobility component as well as kind of the strength and stabilization fundamentals to get you back to a point, hopefully, where those nerves are not so agitated, and then progressing from there with some of the other stuff that we've talked about.